Greetings, Professor. This is my presentation on Education is the Key to Liberation, a comparative literary analysis of The Ultimate Tragedy and Mayambe. Education is the fundamental basis that underpins the work of the emancipation of every human being. These are the words of Amir Cabral, written in 1951, more than a decade before Guinea-Bissau fired a single shot in this war of independence. Today, I want to argue that this idea that education is the key to liberation is not just a political slogan, it is the ideological thread that connects two of the most important novels to come out of Lusophone Africa. The Ultimate Tragedy by Abdullah Silla of Guinea-Bissau and Mayambe by Pepetela of Angola. These two novels, written in different countries about different struggles, are rooted in the same belief that you cannot free a people until you free their minds. Two revolutions, one ideology. Let me introduce the two texts at the center of this presentation. The Ultimate Tragedy is set in Guinea-Bissau under Portuguese colonial rule. It follows Nandi, a young black woman who leaves her village in Biambo seeking work in the colonial city of Bissau. The very first thing that happens to her is her Portuguese employer renames her Daniela, stripping her of her African name because, in her employer's own words, it sounds too communist. That single act of renaming is the whole argument of the novel in a miniature. Colonialism's first weapon was not the gun. It was the erasure of who you are. Author Abdullah Silla, who was born in Guinea-Bissau in 1958 in Cabral's own homeland, uses Nandi's story to show what happens when people's language, identity, and self-knowledge are systematically destroyed. Mayambe, on the other hand, was written by Pepetela while he was literally in the forest fighting with the MPLA, Angola's People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola. The novel follows a guerrilla unit debating politics, identity, and what kind of a nation they are building as they fight. Pepetela didn't write this for publishers. No, he wrote this for his fellow fighters. The novel itself is an act of political education. These two texts are in conversation with each other, and the voice connecting them is Amir Cabral. My central argument is this. The Ultimate Tragedy and Mayambe, though set in different Lusophone African nations, Guinea-Bissau and Angola, are united by a shared anti-colonial ideology rooted in Cabral's conviction that liberating the mind through education is inseparable and indeed precedes political and military liberation. This argument rests on three pillars. First, colonialism destroys knowledge. Both novels show that Portugal's colonial project was fundamentally an assault on African minds, erasing language, history, and identity through education systems. Two, education is a weapon. Pepetela and the MPLA in Angola and Cabral's PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau both built schools in their liberated zones while the armed struggle was still happening. Literature itself was a tool of political consciousness. Mayambe is proof of that. Third, this is a shared ideology across borders. Though Angola and Guinea-Bissau are geographically separated, both nations drew from the same Cabralian framework. You cannot have a free nation without first freeing your mind. Militant education, the PAIG school in the forest. My first source is Sonia Vaz Borges, writing for the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research in 2022. Her article documents how Amir Cabral's PAIGC, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, built an entire school system inside the liberated forest zone while simultaneously waging an armed war against Portugal. By 1966, they had 127 schools, serving over 13,000 students, built from nothing in the middle of a war. Cabral coined the concept of what he called militant education. In his framework, every person in the struggle had an educational role. The teacher, the soldier, the student, all three were simultaneously educators and learners. Education and armed resistance were not separate tracks, they were the same track. And here's a quote that I want you to hold on to. Cabral said in 1969, "It is the consciousness of a man that guides the gun, and not the gun that guides his consciousness." This is the ideological foundation of both novels. In Mayambe, fighters who lack political consciousness become the movement's greatest internal threat. In The Ultimate Tragedy, a man without a liberated consciousness cannot navigate his own freedom. Crucially, Vaz Borges also documents that Cabral directly co-founded the movement that became the MPLA, Pepetela's movement, in Paris in 1957. The same ideology that built the schools in Guinea-Bissau ran through the writings of Mayambe, Pepetela's literature as anti-colonial pedagogy. My second source is Charlotte Pickles, writing for Newcastle University, Decolonizing Modern Language and Cultural blog in 2021. Her article focuses on Pepetela's work, specifically how his novels were designed not just as stories, but as tools of political education. Pickles argues something essential for my argument. In Pepatelo's literary universe, education itself is framed as a victory over colonialism, not simply a preparation for it. The act of learning, of reading, of building consciousness is already liberation in motion. When Pepetelo wrote Mayombe in 1971, he was a guerrilla fighter for the MPLA. He was living Cabral's ideology in real time. The novel wasn't written to be published. It was written to give his fellow fighters a mirror for their own struggle, to help them understand why they were fighting and what kind of society they were trying to build. After Angola's independence, Pepetelo was made Deputy Minister of Education. That pipeline from fighting in the forest to writing a novel for the fighters to redesigning a nation's education system is the clearest possible illustration of Cabral's thesis in action. This connects directly to the ultimate tragedy, where Mayombe envisions education as a tool of building a new nation. The ultimate tragedy shows what happens when that work is left undone. When a people gain independence without the educational decolonization that should have come with it. Amir Cabral, liberator, theorist, educator. My third source is Curry Mallet, writing for Liberation School in 2023. On the 50th anniversary of Cabral's assassination, this article positions Cabral not just as a military and political leader, but as one of the most important educational theorists of the 20th century. Mallet identifies three concepts in Cabral's thoughts that are essential to my argument. First, re-Africanization. Cabral argued that Portuguese colonialism was first and foremost an act of cultural erasure. What he called de-Africanization. The colonial school system systematically dismantled African identity, language, and history. Liberation, therefore, had to begin with reclaiming those things. Both Ultimate Tragedy and Mayombe dramatized this struggle. Characters fighting not just against Portuguese guns, but against the colonial residue inside their own minds. Two, unity and struggle. Cabral's model was not just military, it was pedagogical. His argument was that you cannot achieve collective liberation without first achieving collective consciousness. Education was the engine of that consciousness. In Mayombe, this plays out in real time as fighters debate ideology and identity. The novel is Cabral's model made flesh. Three, Freire's endorsement. The third concept is Cabral's connection to Paulo Freire, the author of The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Freire called Cabral one of the two greatest expressions of the 20th century and was personally invited to Guinea-Bissau after independence to help redesign their school system based on Cabral's principles. This is the scale of Cabral's influence. His ideas did not just stay in Guinea-Bissau. They traveled to Angola and into the literary imagination of writers like Pepetela and Abdullah Sila. Two nations, one liberation ideology. Now, let me put both novels directly in conversation with each other. Colonial education. The ultimate tragedy shows us how Portuguese colonialism erased Ghanaian identity. Nandi is literally renamed Daniela by her employer, stripped of her African name as an act of cultural domination. In Mayombe, the MPLA fighters are actively debating how to undo the same damage. The novel functions as a classroom in the forest. Role of knowledge. In the ultimate tragedy, ignorance, deliberately manufactured by colonialism, is the protagonist's greatest enemy. Consciousness is salvation. In Mayombe, characters who lack ideological clarity become the movement's biggest internal threat. In both novels, education is not optional, it is survival. Post-independence. The ultimate tragedy is the warning. Independence without educational decolonization leaves people unable to govern themselves freely. Mayombe is the vision. Written during the struggle, it imagines the kind of educated, conscious society that must be built after liberation. Read together, they form a complete argument. Cabral's framework. The PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau built 127 schools in liberated zones during the armed struggle. And Abdullah Silla writes from that same nation, from inside Cabral's world. Pepetela lived Cabral's ideology simultaneously as a fighter, a writer, and eventually Angola's deputy minister of education. These novels are not just literary texts, they are political documents. Liberation of the mind precedes liberation of the land. Let me bring this argument home. The Ultimate Tragedy and Mayombe are not merely novels about war and independence. They are arguments, active, urgent arguments for the indispensability of education as a revolutionary force. Rooted in Amir Cabral's Pan-African ideology, both texts demonstrate that liberation movements of Guinea-Bissau and Angola understood the same fundamental truth. Colonialism's most devastating weapon was not the gun. It was the erasure of colonized people's knowledge of themselves. To fight back meant to educate first. Three takeaways. Literature is praxis. Both novels were written as acts of liberation, not just descriptions of it. Pepetela wrote Mayombe in the forest while fighting for Angola's independence. Abdullah Silla wrote The Ultimate Tragedy from Cabral's own Guinea-Bissau as a reckoning with what colonial damage looks like from the inside. Neither was a passive observer. Cabral is bridge. Cabral's ideology crosses national borders. It connects Guinea-Bissau and Angola, two separate nations, two separate struggles under one framework. Silla writes from Cabral's homeland. Pepetela writes from a movement Cabral helped found. Cabral is the intellectual thread running through both texts. Education first. Political liberation, cultural liberation, and military liberation all flow from a liberated, educated consciousness. Cabral said in 1951. Both novels prove it decades later. Education is not the key to liberation because it's a nice idea. It is the key to liberation because without it, freedom just is a word. Here are the works cited that grounded this analysis. All three articles, both novels, and Cabral's collected writing are listed here for your reference. I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you've done for me this semester. I appreciate you and enjoy your vacation in Brazil.